So one of the races that has drawn a lot of attention around the nation is the race between Markey and Joe Kennedy III. Now, this race has garnered a lot of attention. It has been pretty interesting so far, but in my opinion, it's actually been very peculiar because, well, it's not that I'm a fan of either of them, but it's that I haven't really been a fan of either of them, and yet there seems to be this really progressive push behind Markey. Now, what we're going to do in this video is examine both of their records objectively, because I feel as if people have already made the decision as if one is a progressive and one is a corporatist, and by the end of this video, you might not feel the same about either of them, or you might feel that both of them fall into one of the two categories. Now, I should preface by saying I have no skin in the game. I do not live in Massachusetts, although obviously they're running for US Senate. I live in Florida, where we don't really get a choice in who's elected because our election integrity is trash. So this is something I felt like needed to be done for just objective discourse, because I don't feel that the independent movement has done a very good job of examining the records of these two candidates. Now, what I want to do is start off with just what I like most about the candidates and what I like least, their most problematic stances. Okay, so for Kennedy, I like the fact that Kennedy has pledged away super PAC money, and he's done so very publicly and very regularly. As recent as the last debate, this is something he's actually been pretty consistent on while running for office, and that's something I appreciate, obviously, as a person who strongly believes in campaign finance reform and getting big money out of politics. I also like the fact that Kennedy actually has a very decent record on foreign policy. Now, will that maintain? It remains to be seen. We'll see if he wins, but he has a decent record on foreign policy, although some people may attribute that to the fact that Trump is in office, so he's doing whatever he can to vote against Trump's agenda. I also like the fact that Kennedy has been consistently for single-payer health care since he has been in Congress since 2013. He voted for Pramila Jayapal's bill, has supported it through his rhetoric in Congress and also his rhetoric throughout his campaign. And he seems to be decent enough on the environment as well. Now, for Markey, he is decent on the environment. He's I would say he's good, I guess. You can say he's good when it comes to the environment, although I wouldn't say that he's as great as people think he might be on that particular issue, but he is good. He's better than almost every Republican, and he is better than, I would say, about half of the Democrats. He is also decent on healthcare. What I mean by that, like the bare minimum, in my humble opinion, is support for single-payer healthcare, Medicare for all, which he has done at least through his voting. However, upon looking up some of his rhetoric, it's kind of like, I don't really know how strongly he believes in it, but I can get behind the fact that he is consistently at least voting for universal health care. So I can get behind that fact. That's kind of actually basically it for Markey. Markey doesn't have a lot of stuff for me to like. I'm not gonna lie to you. And I've been researching Markey on and off really since he introduced the Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal, at least whenever I actually thought it was going to be comprehensive, the Green New Deal was like, right? It was a good litmus test to see who was going to be at least try to be progressive on that issue. But Markey hasn't actually done all that much since. So, but those few things about both of them I like. Okay, so let's get to the problems, like the overall problems that I have with both of them before we dig into some of their votes and things like that. We'll start with Markey this time. The Telecommunications Act of 1996. When the internet began booming, telecommunications monopolies got fearful. They were threatened because all of a sudden, with access to this new digital world, you would see things like, well, what you see today: independent media networks popping up, digital telecommunications companies becoming wildly. I mean, look at Netflix. That would be technically one of those companies, right? They get exclusive deals. Hulu, you see, you can stream sports or movies on any of these networks live now. They kind of knew what was coming. Now, Markey was one of the primary proponents, fought tooth and nail to ensure that the Telecommunications Act of 1996 was passed. And what this did was create a monopoly, or allowed companies to create a monopoly. They could buy up more local radio stations than they could before, more local TV stations than they could before. And essentially, one of the reasons you see the consolidation of media into these, 4 or 5 major corporations that we see today is largely because of Markey. And we all know what we deal with as far as progressives, populists on both sides. We know what we deal with as far as media suppression is concerned. And Markey is largely responsible for that. Also, his Iraq war vote and his foreign policy in general. His foreign policy is just trash. It is utterly despicable. Okay? I like the way that truthout.org described it. They said that Markey is actually to the right of most Democrats, even the hawkish ones. He's to the right. He voted on the Iraq war. He voted obviously to support the war in Afghanistan, but almost everybody did, but Barbara Lee. But still, that's two down. Even though he's voted against NDAAs in the past, he votes almost exclusively to support every single military operation that they push, including Libya, some stuff in Iran, like I said, Iraq, Afghanistan. He just has not been good on foreign policy at all. And then you have, of course, the 94 crime bill vote. Need I say more? Need I say more? Also, his lack of addressing this entire situation with police brutality, George Floyd, everything that's been going on. He's been very, very quiet about it. And one of the reasons why is because, like I said in the past, he's actually been known to support a lot of the policies that have allowed these police officers to get away with literal murder. My problems with Kennedy. He used to be very bad on marijuana. Actually, he was sided with police departments on a lot of issues more often than I'd like. Much more often than I'd like. Like Markey, he is bad on the Israel-Palestine issue. He is not universally against fracking from what I've read, unless he's changed his stance there. Like Markey, it's not that he's inconsistent as you would think he is. He's actually much more consistent than you would think he is. However, he pushes just too many platitudes at times, and he stops just short of where I like where, when it comes to legislation, you need to introduce it, then you have to reintroduce it again, then you have to introduce it again, and then you have to talk about it, then you have to fight for it, and there's a whole process. And it's not like Pramila Jayapal, for example, who introduced legislation and she's constantly fighting for it and reintroducing it and tweaking it throughout her term in Congress. You could say Bernie does that a lot, Tulsi does this a lot, even Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib do this a lot. as far as their terms are concerned. They've only been in for like 2 years, but Kennedy's been in since 2013. You don't see this a lot from him. You don't see him introduce a lot of legislation, and you don't see him fight hard for progressive legislation, even though he might vote for it. So for me, it's not just about the vote, right? Where are you at when it's time to vote, and then fight, and then speak on it? Use that massive Kennedy platform that you have to speak on it. I do have a problem with legacy. I'm about it. He obviously has the freedom to run. That's no beef. However, I do have a problem with kind of like riding the Kennedy wave. That's kind of like one of the smaller things, but there is something to be said that if you are going to do that, then you need to be a little bit more like JFK or Robert Kennedy Jr., rather than the corporate side of the Kennedy family, which a lot of us are familiar with as well. So those are just some of the overall issues and the overall good things I have to say about both of them. Now let's take a little bit of a deep dive into the policy problems and the good things that both of them have done. So now here comes the fun part. Let's examine both of their stances on single-payer healthcare and Medicare for all. Now there's been this rumor, I don't know what else to call it. It's actually kind of like a flat out lie that Markey and Kennedy are completely different, and one's inconsistent and the other one is not on the Medicare for all issue and single payer healthcare in general. However, I'm here to tell you that is actually not the case. That is an lie. Can't have those. What do I mean by that? Let's examine Kennedy, for example. Kennedy actually co-sponsored Medicare for all, not just any version of Medicare for all, but the Medicare for all that many deem to be the most comprehensive Medicare for all legislation introduced. And that is the one that was introduced by Pramila Jayapal. I know. Yeah, that's a big deal. Now, obviously, he's only been in office since 2013, so he was not there to vote for Conyers or Kucinich's bill, the original Medicare for all, if you will. However, since he has been in office, he has been a consistent proponent of Medicare for all. That's a fact. I don't know if people want to argue with that, but it is what it is. This is a fact. But so people have been wrong on that particular issue regarding Kennedy. It's not true that he isn't for Medicare for all. It's not true that he seems to be swayed in one way or like one way against the issue of Medicare for all in any way. And the only problem that I have as far as his consistency is concerned so far is the fact that he just didn't join the Medicare for all caucus that Pramila Jayapal put together, even though he did, of course, co-sponsor that legislation. The reason I say that is because of what I said in the beginning of the video. You have to be willing to fight, right? You got to be in the trenches. You can't understand the policy at least comprehensively, that you can't understand it, you can't fight for it to the degree that you need to fight for it in public when you're being challenged, etc., unless you are in the trenches, crafting, working with, and digging through those policies. So that would be one of my main critiques of Kennedy there. Now, Markey did also co-sponsor Bernie's Medicare for All, the most recent one. He co-sponsored Bernie's Medicare for All legislation in 2017 as a senator still. And he also co-sponsored Conyers and Kucinich's bill when he was in Congress, which is actually pretty interesting because most of the Democrats did at that point. It's wild how many people supported Medicare for All before it became a quote-unquote pro-Bernie issue. It was still wildly popular in Congress, even back then, when somebody like Kucinich and Conyers introduced it. And that, at the time, was considered the gold standard for healthcare. So Markey is good when it comes to his support, consistent support for legislation regarding Medicare for all. What my overall prognosis regarding whether or not they'll support Medicare for all is that basically I think that both of them, given the situation, like even if a Democrat were in power, both of them would vote yes for Medicare for all. Both of them, if they're in the Senate, would co-sponsor the legislation for Medicare for all. But I'm not confident either of them would introduce legislation to fight for Medicare for all if, like, Bernie Sanders left the Senate. I'm not confident in that, but I am confident that both would support it. I'm confident that both would probably co-sponsor it. Now, whose advocacy am I more confident in? Well, actually, here is where I am more confident in Kennedy's advocacy than Markey's as far as single-payer healthcare is concerned. The reason why is because I looked up several statements, or I tried to, in Markey's case. I looked up past statements about Medicare for all, past statements about single payer, and given that Markey has been around for a long time and has co-sponsored 3 Medicare for all bills, I thought that there would be more affirmative statements regarding Medicare for all, defending Medicare for all. I thought that there would be more statements on his website going into detail about the importance of single payer healthcare and all the different ways that he has advocated for it, maybe even worked with Bernie Sanders or Pramila Jayapal to get it done. And there was basically nothing. Whereas when you're looking at Kennedy's site and Kennedy's statements, they were much more affirmative. They were much more consistent over the years. And this is actually a position that he has maintained with pride, right? It wasn't something that he did like what we saw Kamala, right? Kamala, quote unquote, co-sponsored a meaningless Medicare for all. It wasn't meaningless, but it was Medicare for all legislation that we knew was going to get passed. It was actually worse than the House version. And of course, a lot of people co-sponsored that because they knew it wasn't going to do anything. But none of them, all of them kind of waffled on the issue in one form or another in their rhetoric and on their websites. And Markey, although he hasn't said anything against it, he's not really he's not convincing me that he actually supports it outside of the vote and outside of like wanting to seem like he's progressive. And here's what I mean about that. So Kennedy's website talks about obviously healthcare is a right, healthcare is a necessity. It, has to be single payer. Like, we have to fight for this now. He even goes into detail about how single payer would mitigate the impacts of COVID on his website. He's just overall more expansive and more convincing on the issue. According to his website, you got to always do your own research to figure out the veracity of some of these claims, because I can't possibly do it all. According to Kennedy's website, he also fought hard to actually make sure that the trans community was given equal treatment under any single payer legislation that was introduced in the House. And also, he passed legislation to close loopholes exploited by pharmaceutical companies. So that's pretty big. Like I said, objectively, Kennedy's website is more expansive and kind of details exactly what he expects a single payer system to look like, and the fruits that he expects to come from that system. Whereas Markey's website just kind of makes him look like he's on the fence. It does. So I don't know if there's enough ground to totally separate these two on the issue. So I, at this point, would tell you to do this as far as this particular issue is concerned. Do your own research on both of them. Do deep research and partially rely on Pramila Jayapal's endorsement if single payer or Medicare for all is your number one issue. That's where I'm at on this, because Pramila Jayapal got a lot of heat for endorsing Kennedy. But when you remember, she introduced the most progressive Medicare for all legislation in Congress to date. When you remember that she's been unwavering in her support of single-payer healthcare. When you remember that Pramila Jayapal put together the Medicare for All caucus that actually got Medicare for All put on the floor to be voted on for the first time in history. No other not Bernie's and not Kucinich's or Conyers legislation had actually been taken to a vote before. Pramila Jayapal put together the coalition to get that done. And that's saying something, because if you all recall, like I said, Kucinich and Conyers Medicare for All legislation was introduced during the Obama era, and he still couldn't get it taken to the floor for a vote. So for Pramila Jayapal to be this great on this particular issue and say, well, Kennedy's my guy, sorry, and diverging from the opinions of AOC and the endorsements of AOC and others. That's a pretty big deal, and I think that should be considered. So do your research on this particular issue and maybe lean a little bit on Pramila Jayapal's judgment here, because she has the history in the background to show that she kind of knows who's going to fight harder for Medicare for all. Because this is something that I would probably consider her an expert in. I'm sure she feels the same way. So let's move on to the next issue. The Green New Deal, people. The Green New Deal. Now, let me go ahead and premise by saying this. The Green New Deal should not be the litmus test for a damn thing when it comes to climate or environmental justice. It doesn't address nuclear energy in any way, doesn't address nuclear waste, and it doesn't give any any provisions as to how they want to go about using some of the positive ways nuclear energy can contribute to emissions reduction. It doesn't do any of that. It doesn't ban fracking. It doesn't do a lot of things, okay? And no one really who's introduced the Green New Deal or strongly supported it has introduced any legislation to follow up in any substantive or genuine way that wasn't full of corporate pork barrel nonsense. So I want to go ahead and get that disclaimer out there. However, the progressive movement, because of AOC, has begun to use the Green New Deal in the framing of the Green New Deal. They've begun to use it as a litmus test. And a lot of progressive, once again, have said that Markey is exclusively better on this issue than Kennedy is. They say it's not even close. Once again, I'm here to tell you, much closer than you might think, ladies and gentlemen. So, let's go ahead and check out what Kennedy has done. Kennedy, despite what some people seem to believe, actually co-sponsored AOC's Green New Deal, and he did so in the very beginning. I don't know why people think that he didn't. I think it may be because AOC keeps affirming that I trust Markey. Markey is good on the Green New Deal. He introduced the Green New Deal, Green New Deal, Green New Deal. And then she, obviously, because she endorsed Markey, she leaves out and omits the fact that, oh yeah, Joe actually co-sponsored, or Kennedy actually co-sponsored this as well. So that's the reality. That's the truth. I know some people don't want to believe it, but it is. So once again, it doesn't matter if you like any of the candidates. You can't just go around telling lies about other candidates, because it diminishes and delegitimizes potentially the candidate that you are backing, because it makes it come out that you're partisan, like you just are following a wave, and that you just want to see your candidate win no matter what, for whatever reason. So that's a lie if you say that Kennedy does not support the Green New Deal. Once again, not even close to being far enough, but progressives tend to use that as a litmus test, so it has to be examined. Markey, of course, like we just said, absolutely did author the Green New Deal in the Senate. Now there's a caveat there. He's not done anything since then. He hasn't furthered that legislation in any way whatsoever. And also, there's this whole thing about, well, the Green New Deal got a bunch of present votes from the Democrats in the Senate. Their excuse is, well, Mitch McConnell didn't even send it through the committee. He rushed the floor vote so it could be used against any particular Democrat in any of the upcoming races. You know, we're in the middle of a presidential election, primary elections, et cetera, et cetera. So the Democrats decided they're all going to vote present. Yeah, that excuse doesn't fly. What that means, Markey, is that your legislation was garbage. The Democrats knew it was garbage, so they all coalesced and said, we're going to vote present as a sign of solidarity against the evil Mitch McConnell, but it was garbage. And the Republicans knew it was garbage, because if it was as comprehensive, you're running on this climate change and climate justice issue, so if it was as comprehensive and meaningful as Markey and AOC and others claim it to be, then they wouldn't be able to use it against you, at least in any Democratic primary. And you should champion it if they try to use it against you in a Republican primary, if it was as comprehensive as you claim it is. But it is not. And so Markey, in my opinion, almost has his authorship of the Green New Deal diminished, because you fought for this thing and then you voted present on your own bill behind the excuse that, oh, well, the Democrats band together on not voting yes on my legislation because they didn't want it to be used against them. that diminishes, in my opinion, your authenticity regarding that particular issue. And so what it looks like is what you did is you co-sponsored or co-authored the Green New Deal with AOC merely to win political points because you knew that you were being primaried for your Senate seat. That's what it looks like. If I'm being frank, Kennedy's family, although we shouldn't do guilt by association, because if we're going to do guilt by association, he is JFK's relative. So I'm just putting this out there because it just needs to be discussed, and you can once again can do your own research here. Kennedy's family was formerly invested heavily into the fossil fuel industry. However, whenever people started screaming it's time to divest from these industries over the last maybe 2 or 3 years, Kennedy's family and Kennedy himself completely divested entirely from the fossil fuel industry, and that's good. That's good. Should they have been as invested in the fossil fuel industry? No. Unfortunately, basically everybody who's invested in the stock market has been, and that's why we screamed divest from that particular industry, and he did so. So you can take that for what it is. Markey and Kennedy both voted against the Keystone Pipeline, so that's good. There was no legislation against the North Dakota Access Pipeline, but it should be mentioned both of them failed the people of North Dakota in that regard, and it's largely probably because it was Obama who was in charge. None of them brought attention to the atrocities that happened at Standing Rock. They both are claiming to be good on environmental justice. However, we know there's like 100% leakage rate when it comes to pipelines, and that pipeline was violating a treaty, and that pipeline was being put through sacred land. And of course, once again, it's an oil pipeline. And so at that point, Markey claiming to be just a historic champion on justice when it comes to the environment, I got to see some result. If you don't have the results to match these claims, then I need to at least see you fighting in the hardest moments. I know Tulsi Gabbard went there. I know Jill Stein and Jamal Baraka went there. I know Robert F. Kennedy Jr. went there. So Kennedy, you have no excuse to pretend as if you didn't know about the issue when it comes to these indigenous Americans, because your relative was there and it made headlines. I know Bernie spoke out on this. I know Nina spoke out. So like, you all knew about this. Both of you all claim to be champions of environmental justice, especially you, Markey. This is one of the things that has put you so far ahead in the minds of some progressives. This is what AOC claims she endorsed you for. And AOC went to Standing Rock. And so for you to pretend like this didn't happen, seemingly because Obama was in power, is absolutely unacceptable. And we do have to keep that in mind regarding both of them when it comes to environmental justice. Now, Markey did help push for a freeze to nuclear proliferation in 1980. That's kind of common sense. I'm glad he did it. It would have been kind of weird if he said otherwise, especially given the context of the impending nuclear war that was happening in the 80s. So that's good. Kennedy obviously wasn't there for that. Now, there was a discussion recently about fracking. Markey, for some reason, is believed to be this anti-fracking champion, and he actually went out of his way to let people know during a debate that he is not for universally banning fracking. He said it needs to be examined. He's not for banning fracking. Anyone who says that is lying to you. People, for some reason, conflate the Green New Deal with being anti-fracking. However, as we have already seen, ladies and gentlemen, the Green New Deal does not have an anti-fracking clause. There's no section of that resolution that addresses fracking. So now Kennedy doesn't seem to be pro-fracking. However, he has not taken the opportunity to come out exclusively against fracking, which is problematic because, once again, if you're going to claim to be a champion of environmental justice, you divested from fossil fuels. Good. You voted against the Keystone Pipeline. Good. However, you have to be against fracking. It just obliterates our environment, and they affect and destroy the most vulnerable communities, poor communities, and communities of color. So they both are not up to par on that issue. especially my standards. So both of them need to address that, and they both need to be held accountable in that department. Marijuana legalization. This has been a topic of discussion as far as Kennedy is concerned. I've seen a lot of people use it to attack him, so I figured we should discuss it. Kennedy is not anti-marijuana legalization. He actually endorsed recreational marijuana legalization. He used to be against it prior to 2018. However, for some reason, there is once again this belief that Markey has always been stellar on this issue. That is not true. I just said he sponsored the 94 crime bill, he voted for and fought for the 94 crime bill, and he helped Clinton get through his entire agenda. That includes with the corrupt ATF, the corrupt DEA, right? We know how we've recently come to know just how corrupt they were. Markey facilitated that. Markey now has come over to the light as far as marijuana is concerned, but he has not exactly been consistent on that issue. Now, granted, I will give him a little leeway here. He's 74 years old, but at that point, I got to give Kennedy a little leeway too, because almost everybody was, in politics, was against recreational use of marijuana because of the lies that were being put out by the pharmaceutical industry. I'm not gonna punish them, as long as they weren't working over the last couple of years to kill the efforts to legalize it with the Senate or the House voting to legalize it. And you see even conservatives coming out and supporting it now. It's become widely popular. You see the states legalize, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not going to demonize them for that, even though it's problematic. But I will say, if you are claiming once again that Kennedy is against recreational use of marijuana, that is a lie. It's not true. Markey and Kennedy both seem to be for it, at least in their recent votes and rhetorically. So that should be made clear. In my opinion, this particular issue of campaign finance reform is the most telling. It should be top 2 or top 3 in how you weigh whether or not you consider them not only the best candidate, but a progressive even to begin with. And I want to be clear about this. Kennedy is leaps and bounds better than Markey on this issue, as I said in the beginning of the video. Kennedy has outright pledged not to take any super PAC money. Any of it. He has signed a pledge to not do it. He has been consistent on this particular issue. To be frank, Markey has not. In fact, he went out of his way to say he's not supporting that. He believes that people should be able to contribute however they want to contribute, but there should just be transparency. Yes, what we have for the most part the FEC for. But super PACs, you can't say there should be transparency and then say, but we should also allow super PACs, because one of the main points of a super PAC is to prevent transparency of the dark money that flows in. And of course, we know that a super PAC allows unlimited amounts of dark money to flow in. So let's take a closer look at this issue. Like I said, Kennedy has pledged to take no super PAC money, and according to every source I could read, he's actually kept that pledge. Now, Markey refused to pledge, my apologies, to not take super PAC money, just demanding transparency, whatever the hell that means. Kennedy had a major super PAC called the New Leadership PAC buy over $1 million in ad space for him around Massachusetts. Now, this particular super PAC was once again created to support him, but it was created by one of Elizabeth Warren's former advisors, and the PAC initially raised $575,000. Now, interestingly enough, at the time of that article being written, $475,000 of that was actually from unions, like from union members, labor groups, and things like that. So that was a little bit interesting, because this has actually been a consistent thing that I've read, which is that basically people keep saying the unions and labor groups are exclusively behind Markey, and that doesn't seem to be true, at least by this metric. Now, whenever Markey challenged Kennedy on this pack, which, I mean, bro, you just said that you're not against super PACs, so it's kind of weird. I mean, if you want to challenge, obviously, you said you're going to do this and you're lying about it. Yeah, but maybe not. So he's inconsistent and you're just not right. That's basically what you're trying to present. You're not right and you know you're not right and you're trying to challenge him on his inconsistency, which is, don't do that. That's stupid. Whenever Markey challenged, he said, Kennedy said this: I know nothing about this. I didn't ask for it and we don't need it. He said this in a video via Facebook page. He goes on to say, we need to, as Democrats, reject dark money. We need to reject super PACs. We need to stand by our principles. So there is a situation, for example, like Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang had a super PAC made to support him. It wasn't him who made it, supposedly. He did not reject it. He did not speak out against it. He, in fact, kind of like said, okay, cool. This is not what Kennedy did. When Kennedy had it brought to his attention, and I'm not going to say he's naive. I'm not going to pretend like he's not a politician, like he doesn't know how some things work. However, even still, just strategically and what it looks like as far as the rhetoric is concerned, the precedent that you are setting, you now put it out there. If you are a super PAC and you're trying to support me, I don't want your support, and I'm demanding that Democrats do the same, which is not what Markey did on this issue. For me, one of the primary indicators that you are the bare minimum, if you're a corporatist versus if you're not a corporatist, is, are you taking dark money from corporations? I mean, and usually that comes by way of super PACs. One is not. This is a fact. Anyone saying that Kennedy is taking dark money from and I had Robbie dig into his files. Y'all know how good Robbie is. Robbie's like, yeah, he has some corp like CEOs and things like that from Massachusetts that have donated to him, but they've also equally donated to Markey. It's like they're just hedging their bets. But they reached the maximum amount. You can see exactly how much they donated, et cetera, et cetera. So that's huge for me. Knowing that a super PAC tried to or spent some money on you and you're like, we don't want your money. Democrats shouldn't want your money. We have to get rid of it. That's huge for me. So Kennedy's campaign manager came out and blasted Markey on this particular issue. Basically saying that you're claiming to walk this progressive walk, but you're not talking the progressive talk regarding campaign finance reform. And I mean, based off of everything that we're seeing here, I would believe her. I do believe her. Now, it goes even further than that, because this is where the Telecommunications Act of 1996 starts to come back into play. Okay. Markey has taken more money from telecommunications industry than anyone else in Congress. And I just told you all the Telecommunications Act of 1996 deregulated and allowed monopolies to be created that created the way that we see information pushed today, where CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and Disney and all these people get to just feed us information. And so that might be, perhaps, I just told you he takes the most money from telecommunications industry. Don't you think they want to protect themselves? Out of curiosity. So do you think that might be why you've seen such glowing reviews of Markey? I mean, just celebrating him in every way when we barely heard his name before. No critical analysis of Markey, by the way, by these big media companies, but they are sent and they blacked out Kennedy in a lot of ways, if we're being honest. So they blacked him out. I haven't really seen a recent interview on CNN or MSNBC or even Fox News when it comes to Kennedy, excuse me. And Markey is being uncritically elevated. Don't you think that's a little bizarre? You don't think that's a little off? You don't have to like either of them, but don't you think that's a little off? It's not the candidates, it's the issue. And as an independent journalist, as a viewer of independent journalists, you should be a little concerned that Markey refused to reject super PACs. He takes the most money from the same propaganda assets that we have seen try and crush the truth in all of its forms. And yet he's the one who's been endorsed by AOC. He's the one being elevated by MSNBC. He's the one even being elevated by a lot of actual credible progressives. Maybe this is a tribute to just how much they've been able to get away with propaganda because of a bill that Markey fought to pass. Now it's time to check out the issue of civil liberties. Now, both of them are not even close to my standard when it comes to civil liberties. They're both somewhat of a mixed bag, both of them. So let me just go ahead and say that right now. But once again, Markey has been kind of celebrated here, and there's supposed to be some type of separation there between them, and it's not that much at all. Actually, there's not much at all. But we'll see who you give the nod to by the end of this. So let's go ahead and check out some of their positions here. So on civil liberties, both have been strong advocates of net neutrality, but I need to help. I got to remind y'all, Markey became a proponent of net neutrality after he functionally took away the ability for anyone to ever be able to compete with the CNNs one day, the AT&Ts, like all telecommunications involved, all this, these major conglomerates that have every advantage, and those same conglomerates like Verizon now are paying to see net neutrality diminished with the money that they've garnered through Markey's legislation. So for me, that is, you can say that maybe Kennedy would have voted for it, maybe, but I don't know that. I can't say, but I know this as an independent journalist. It's just with my own network, it's extremely frustrating to see what Markey helped to get done. And so his advocacy for net neutrality to me seems to be smoke and mirrors, a cover for his telecommunications bill. That's what it seems to be to me, which he never discusses. And the Telecommunications Act has really never been discussed within the progressive movement, despite it having so much of a negative impact on the way we're able to get our news. Kennedy voted against the reauthorization of the Foreign Intelligence Warrantless Surveillance Act. So that's good for him. Kennedy actually also supported Amash's legislation to limit officials' ability to search for and read private messages under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. So shout out to Amash. He's always been good on civil liberties. And shout out to Kennedy there. Markey, however, did vote for the Patriot Act. He voted against expanding the Patriot Act most of the time under Bush, but then he voted to expand certain portions of it under, like what I was just talking about, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Review Act under Obama. Basically, so let me tell you what the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, Review Act said, because this is why it's a big deal. It states that a court order is not necessary for electronic surveillance of any communication between persons who are not known to be United States persons and who are reasonably believed to be outside of the United States. That's a big deal. Not known to be United States persons. What the hell does that mean? So Markey voted for that. That's the main purpose of that bill. Even though, of course, it was the title is framed in such a way that it's reviewing surveillance, but what it is doing for the most part is increasing the ability to legally surveil innocent civilians. Now, once you review Markey's record, and you need to do this, you need to review Markey's record on this. Don't just trust my word for it. I'm just giving you a synopsis, a snapshot, if you will. But once you review his record, basically it looks like he only seems to vote, or his vote seems to only be reliant on who was in the presidency at the time. That's what he had no problem giving Obama a lot of surveillance power. Seemed to be way more skeptical when it came to giving Bush surveillance power, and obviously way more skeptical when it comes to giving Trump surveillance power. Kennedy has not given Trump any extra surveillance power, and neither has Markey. So there you go with that. in civil liberties. I put the 94 crime bill vote in civil liberties for obvious reasons. Markey pushed that. He got to eat that. Kennedy is getting better on the issue of policing. We just kind of have to wait and see if it's going to be as genuine as he is claiming it is. Now for my favorite part, foreign policy. Markey has been gutter trash on foreign policy. Abysmal, abominable. I mean, every negative synonym you can think to describe somebody being bad at something, that's been Markey on foreign policy. Okay? His foreign policy is actually so damning. It's so bad that if this was someone like a Tulsi Gabbard or Rashida Tlaib or any of the new wave of progressives, they would have never gotten their feet off the ground with foreign policy as bad as Markey's has been. It would have never got a chance to be considered progressive. AOC wouldn't have even felt comfortable endorsing any of them because they would have been immediately called out. So that's a little problematic for me. Now, here's what I mean by that. He voted to bomb Kosovo, voted to invade Iraq and Afghanistan, voted for the Patriot Act, as I said. He voted for illegal sanctions against Iran and to escalate tensions there a lot of the time. And when a resolution was introduced in 2011 to ensure Obama did not send troops or put any military forces whatsoever, send military aid on the ground in Libya, Markey voted against that. So he voted against preventing Obama from putting troops on ground in Libya. He wanted to give Obama or allow Obama to usurp the War Powers Act, take unilateral control over the troops, go over Congress's head, and commit regime change against Gaddafi. That is open market slavery, people, is what we have there right now. Open market slavery. Even though officially we didn't have any troops on the ground. Officially, I can tell you for a fact, I know that special forces have been in Libya a lot. I know for a fact that that is true. They usually hide it behind a joint effort with the United Nations or NATO. But the special forces have absolutely been on the ground in Libya. And we saw what this has led to. Open market slavery, where Markey has had no problem saying zero about that fact, despite the fact that his efforts helped to lead to this conclusion. Now, interestingly enough, Kennedy has voted against every NDAA. All of them, since he's been in office, which is kind of surprising. I was not expecting that. I thought that he voted for at least one of Obama's, but he didn't. He voted against all of Trump's. He voted against all the ones that he was there for Obama. Now, it should be noted that there haven't really been enough votes on like major issues of war other than the Iran issue, which he did vote against, and him and Markey both voted no war with Iran. That was introduced in the Senate and in the House. They both voted for that. Okay, so they voted against having any type of war with Iran. But basically, other than that, there's not been any major issue for him to have casted a very controversial vote where he has to challenge the Democratic establishment in the military-industrial complex in that particular way. So that remains to be seen. If he gets power in the Senate, will that change? We don't know. But he voted against the NDAA under Obama and voted against the NDAA under Trump. He hasn't really, I mean, a lot of the stuff that Obama did overseas, Kennedy was quietly against. I wish it would have been louder, but he was quietly, as far as legislation was concerned, against it. Now, once again, with things heating up over the next couple of years with China, Russia, and Iran, it's important that we pay very close attention to how Kennedy moves in the House or in the Senate if he wins his race, because that will be like something that he hasn't established a long enough background yet. And I want to see, because rhetorically, I don't hear really anything from him when it comes to a lot of that stuff. So he hasn't shown me an understanding of why it's important to have be an anti-war voice in a military-industrial complex-led Congress. So that's what I want to see from him going forward. And I think he should be stronger there. I think you can garner a lot more support, and you can start to separate yourself on that issue when it comes to Markey. If you were stronger there, not just anti-Trump, not saying that that's all you've been, because like I just said, but he has to be pro-peace, not just anti-war, if that makes sense. Now, on the issue of Israel and Palestine, Markey and Kennedy are trash. Both of them. Now, unfortunately, that seems to be par for the course when it comes to the Democrats. Okay? This is just reality. But it doesn't matter. Inexcusable. Gotta do better. Both of them have to be accountable for the lives that are affected by the apartheid state of Israel. Now, Markey has been an ardent supporter for Israel and was ripped in 2016 for his support of the Israeli apartheid state by a pro-Palestinian group. So that was just in 2016. He was ripped for that. Once again, these are usually issues that if you are a progressive, you're immediately like, I've seen them try to rip Tulsi for this. I remember when AOC even got just dragged for her statement on Israel and Palestine before. Okay? This has been a progressive litmus test for quite some time, and yet it is not an issue that Markey gets critiqued for, although a lot of progressives say when they were making this statement, are these statements regarding progressives running during the primaries, they were saying that this was like, we're just holding people accountable. That's why we're going so hard at them over this issue. But nobody has actually talked about Kennedy's or Markey's problematic stances here, and they're competing for the Senate. It's a little bit. Selective outrage is problematic, bro. The selective outrage is problematic here. Kennedy and Markey both supported a bill that would punish individuals for supporting BDS by making it a felony, punishable by up to $1 million and 20 years in prison to support BDS. That falls into the civil liberties. That falls into Israel-Palestine. That falls into foreign policy. They get an F on Israel and Palestine. Both Kennedy and Markey get a whole F on Israel and Palestine. There is no debate to be had regarding the fact that Israel is an apartheid state. No debate to be had. And then you are trying to restrict people's rights to participate, and use their money, use their equity, their capital to participate or protest however they choose. Wasn't it Citizens United that said corporations are people and money is free speech? Well, then you have no right to push that. And hey, what's the point of not taking money from AIPAC and the Israeli lobby if you were going to push their agenda? All right. Now, Kennedy's divergence with this issue is actually not all that surprising. He is in the largest Jewish district in Massachusetts, and they are very much so Zionists and very much so pro-Israel, Israeli government. Okay. Now, it is still disappointing because he could use this opportunity, and maybe he will. I don't know. I really don't know. But he could use this opportunity to actually reach out to the Jewish community and say, look, completely understandable that you believe that Israel has a right to exist. Completely understandable. However, we cannot ignore the fact that they've been acting as an apartheid state. You cannot ignore the corruption that we've seen being put on display within the Israeli government regarding any issue. Netanyahu's constantly under scrutiny now, and even pro-Israel firsters don't like him. So the corrupt are creating the laws and the mandates and the discourse and the narrative, and then the most vulnerable people are feeling the flames. Unacceptable. In my opinion, that should have been an opportunity for Kennedy to bridge the gap, to say, we cannot allow Israel to do to the Palestinians what were done to the Jews, which is literally murder them, put them, in effectively the same circumstances as the ghettos in Germany or in Poland, and diminish their humanity. That would have and still could be a good opportunity for Kennedy to completely change an entire district as far as believing in equitable rights for Palestinian people. So as far as Israel-Palestine is concerned, F for both Kennedy and for Markey. Foreign policy overall, I gotta give the nod to Kennedy. Unquestionably, Markey has basically been a warmonger. So, what's the verdict? My verdict is this: I'm not going to tell you who to choose and who not to choose. I'm not running and I'm not voting in that particular race. I know many of you aren't either, but I see a lot of people advocating in one way or the other. But I hope that this does at least make you start to question some things that you've been seeing online. We've been hearing that it's Kennedy who's a corporatist and Markey who is a progressive, and that if you even begin to question this, then you are wrong. That you're enabling the establishment. We saw people attacking Pramila Jayapal, despite the fact that arguably Kennedy and Markey are similar on Medicare for All, and from a Jayapal standpoint, as I explained earlier, Kennedy probably seems better on Medicare for All, single payer health care specifically, as far as his willingness to fight for it. And people were attacking Pramila Jayapal, claiming Kennedy is not for Medicare for All, which indeed was a lie. We saw people attacking Bernie for abstaining as far as endorsing someone in this race. And that's because, well, I'm sure he doesn't want to upset the honestly, like, the Kennedy family is still well connected. I'm sure he doesn't want to upset them. And there's the other side of that fence where Markey is now being considered a progressive, and Bernie could actually diverge and do something where he endorsed Kennedy, because actually Kennedy has been on the right side of a lot of issues. And that no super PAC thing, massive. Wouldn't you agree? The Medicare for All, no super PAC, Green New Deal, better foreign policy than Bernie. Granted, Bernie has been there a lot longer, but better foreign policy than Bernie. Endorsing Kennedy could have upset the telecommunications establishment, don't you think? Huge possibility. But people attacked him for not endorsing at all. It's because he doesn't really believe in Markey. He knows Markey. Yeah, he plays politics with him, but he knows them. And he doesn't know enough, in my opinion, about Kennedy. But he was attacked as if it should be clear that Kennedy is a corporatist and Markey is a progressive. Now, so the question then becomes, why do people think that Markey is the progressive and Kennedy is absolutely not, and there's no possible way in hell? And the truth is, what it seems like to me is that it's a narrative siege once again, and a lot of that was aided and abetted, unfortunately, by AOC and even somewhat by Bernie, because he was, kind of rubbing shoulders with Markey a little bit because of his support for the Green New Deal. It was definitely a political move. But AOC uncritically endorsed Markey. AOC religiously, I don't believe it's intentional, but basically lies by omission regarding Markey's record. Markey is pro-fracking. If you want to talk about environmental justice, that's damn near where the buck stops, if you want to be, an absolutist about it. But Markey is pro-fracking. Markey couldn't even, his own legislation wasn't good enough for him to vote for, because they were worried that it was so lame that it could be used against them and their own races. So AOC has kind of aided and abetted this narrative siege where Kennedy is being overly scrutinized, which I guess is not really ever a bad thing when it comes to politics. When I say overly scrutinized, people are scrutinizing him without actually doing any research, which is super weird. And Markey is not being scrutinized at all. It's, oh, he's not perfect. You know what the oh, he's not perfect is? When you aren't scrutinizing at all the opponent, but uplifting one as a progressive. Oh, he's not perfect is simply, oh, I haven't actually done my research. Oh, my favorite politician, my favorite personality, my favorite, the people I follow on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, my favorite indie media journalists, they've all told me Markey is it, and that there's no debate to be had. And oh, by the way, Nancy Pelosi endorsed Kennedy. Nancy Pelosi endorsed Kennedy because she's the fundraising machine for the Democratic Party, and this is still a Kennedy. I mean, that's just reality of it. I mean, it's still not a good look, but establishment people have endorsed Bernie over the last 20. You didn't say throw away the endorsement, did you? No, you didn't. Establishment people, Nancy Pelosi also endorsed AOC. And surprise, surprise, none of the people who have complained about Pelosi endorsing Markey, none of the people who have complained about Pelosi endorsing AOC have complained about Pelosi. None of the people who have complained about Pelosi endorsing Kennedy have said that is the end all be all for whether or not AOC is a progressive when Pelosi endorsed AOC. That's weird. Because I was like, oh, that's a problem. I even said that's a problem when it came to Kennedy. Because of the optics. But at this particular juncture, going through the records, no way I can cover everything. Once again, go do your own research. But going through the record, Kennedy hasn't bent the knee to Pelosi as much as AOC has. It's from all my research. And it's probably more likely that he's benefiting from his family's name because they're a big fundraiser. Like, that's what the Kennedys do. They have a lot of political sway in Massachusetts and across the country. That's obvious. But there's some inconsistencies here. There's no consistent principle that has been driving the narrative of this race, other than the principle that AOC said we should support somebody, and therefore we must do so, and we must do so uncritically. Where was Markey at in 2016? For him to have separated himself from Kennedy, I remember Kennedy being very quiet in 2016. But where was Markey at if he's a progressive? He was quiet. He was over there hanging out with Warren. Do they both have good things about them? Absolutely. Do they both have bad things about them? Absolutely. But one, the telecommunications guy, the telecommunication monopolies guy, has been elevated uncritically, while the other has been summarily dismissed based on lies. And that cannot stand, people, because that is how we get taken advantage of. When either of them make it to Congress, we have to be willing to challenge them, regardless of who's endorsed them. We have to be willing to challenge them with the same fervor, regardless of which one of them makes it. That is my point. And we're setting ourselves up for failure. We're setting ourselves up with the same exact person who has prevented us from disseminating information and controlling an appropriate amount of the information in the media that would be fair in a way. Like we're uplifting that guy. We all know how bad suppression is at this point. And that's a problem. So I'd like to know what you think about this video. Like this video, share this video, leave a comment below. More than anything else, always remember, find your balance. Peace. If you like that segment of Mikasa Sukasa, don't forget to like the video and smash that subscribe button. Want access to members only live streams, behind the scenes footage, and other premium content? Well, you can endorse us on Rockfin Premium, become a patron through Patreon, or you can sign up for the MCSC Premium membership through YouTube. All the links are in the description below. But hey, more than anything else, always remember,
find your balance.
Find your balance.
Find your balance.
Find your balance. Find your balance.
Find your balance. Find your balance.
Always remember, more than anything else, find your balance.
peace.